Hello and welcome back to Oliver's rehab journey from shod to barefoot. And as you can see, winter has hit us very hard. We went straight from summer into winter. It's kind of crazy. So he's been enjoying being a muddy mess, as you can see in this picture. So I had noticed after I rode him when he got incredibly worse while I was riding, um, that his body grew even more tense as I was riding. And this could be compensating from the sore feet, but this also, I feel like, is a result of how he has been moving and carrying himself over a long period of time. So, in order to help kind of release some of that, I actually had my friend Morgan with Feelin Fine Equine come out and work on him. And as you can see, he absolutely loved it. And I feel like it's so important to include body work in a hoof care rehab journey because there is such a chicken and egg reciprocal effect of the hooves and the body. So, in order to truly make a difference, I feel like we need to address both the hooves and the body together. And what I've been doing with this rehab is really changing variable by variable in order to show you guys really what is going to help and what really isn't going to help, if that makes sense. So I have only been changing one thing at a time, and the hoof protection is very important, but I also felt like the body was equally, if not more important in this situation. So I actually went to an intensive one class of Morgan's over the weekend, and she showed us like equine anatomy and biomechanics and how to kind of troubleshoot their bodies and what's really going on. And I thought it was really cool. So I pulled him out for a session just to show you guys and break it down what's really going on and what I see what's going on in his movement. So then we can like track together over time the changes that we are both seeing in his body. And I would love for you guys to participate. Um, I did feel really bad about riding him early on with how sore he got, but I do feel like it was a good thing because it kind of gives a baseline. And I know it can be really tricky during a hoof rehab to know when is okay to ride and when it's not. And I feel like kind of just testing the variables is so important, especially for Mr. Oliver here. So I can really see what is going on in his body and what is going on in his hooves and really start to like put the puzzle pieces together for this rehab. And I am super excited because as I groom him, I noticed that he has a lot less tension in his body. And I feel like this is from Morgan working on him. But what I did notice was that once the tension was released in his body, his muscles became really loose. So he actually had an easier time picking his hooves up for me. I had noticed when I pulled his shoes off that he had started to become more wobbly, had a harder time like lifting his hooves, and he's actually doing a lot better here, which says to me that some of the issues that we were having is not just from the sore feet, but from the sore body as well. And I think it's so fascinating, like how much reciprocal action goes on between the hoof and the body. And that is why I prioritize the posture as a hoof care professional because the nervous system really drives the entire horse. And our proprioception is heavily linked to our well being. And in order for our horses to feel and have that well being, they do need a balanced hoof, they do need a comfortable hoof, and we want to support their nervous system in doing that. But there's also the fact that their body remembers things. So when we go through things, whether we have an injury or soreness over a long period of time, our body will actually tend to get stuck in those positions and stuck in those frames. So even if you're going through a hoof rehab and their hooves are doing better, their hooves are looking better even on radiographs and they're not doing as well, I feel like that is because of some of that like memory from their nervous system holding on to what's going on in their bodies. So that is why I think it's so important to just go through a whole workup when you're trying to do a rehab. It's not just their hooves, it's not just their body, it's not just their teeth, it's all of it. And Another thing that I wanted to point out too is this is something you can learn like while you're grooming. Like if you learn the anatomy and if you're local to Utah, I highly recommend Morgan's intensives. They're amazing. Um, if you learn the anatomy and you know how a muscle is supposed to function, how a muscle is supposed to look, you can keep track and look at these changes in your own horse as they're going on. And just while I'm working him over, I'm just thinking about, okay, how does this muscle look? How is his body functioning like over a long period of time and what kind of changes there are? And it's really fascinating to see how he responds to different body parts being groomed as well. So it's just really fun for me to like go through and do all of this and also to share it with you guys. And honestly, I'm kind of convinced that he gets this money because he loves being groomed and it feels really good. You can see he's got the wiggle lip going on, especially in his upper cervicals. That is where a lot of his tension was, that I had noticed and Morgan had noticed. And that is something that I see a lot with sore front feet is the pull tension and pull pain because they kind of have to lift their head up to try and shift their weight back off of their front feet. And it creates kind of like that upside down neck that he's got going on, and also like the dip behind the withers. So just another thing to like keep an eye out for when you're doing the rehab. But yeah, I just think it's really fascinating and it's been really fun to share this with you guys. So we'll look into his movement and what's going
Okay,
on,
ready?
and I'll talk a little
Ready?
bit more about that as I get him into the round pen.
Oh my word.
So right away, I noticed that his head and honestly, kind of his whole spine doesn't have a lot of movement through it. And I think he does need to warm up a little bit because it's cold. So as I'm moving him out, I'm trying not to assess until he's warmed up a little bit. So here you can see he's starting to move out more. And the first thing I actually noticed was that he was a lot shorter on his right hind than he normally is. And just that he's overall kind of fixing his head in one position. He's not really swinging his head and neck like he should. What Morgan said was that they should kind of move it in a more figure eight pattern instead of like a chicken peck like he is doing. And as I'm going in the round pen, I'm not just looking at their stride lengths. I just want to look at their overall body and look at really what's going on. I noticed that he's got a little bit of a hock wobble that I hadn't seen before, and this is usually due to tension in the lower back, the lumbosacral area, which adds up a lot with the low heels, and then also just the tension that he had in his spine that is causing like the roach back over his top line. So I'm also looking for if he's relaxing. I'm looking for licking and chewing. I'm looking for all of the signs that he's starting to move out of it because he does seem quite short on his front sometimes, and other times he seems okay, which I feel like is also a sore hoof and body thing. Like, just overall, that's what's going on for him. So, after I've moved him around for a little bit, I only maybe did about 5 minutes of work on the lunge line before I started asking him for specific exercises like that one to kind of shift his weight back into his chest, and also to assess his pole range of motion and other things in his body that Morgan
Sorry, I didn't
has
mean to hurt your back.
taught me over the weekend. And right away, when I put my hands on his pole, this is something that he's done since I got him. He throws his head up immediately, which is usually a sign of tension and pain. So I'm just going to work through that a little bit. And what I really like about Morgan's way of doing things is that you always check and then you perform either the mobilization or the release or the exercise, and then you recheck. So here he kind of turned his head all the way around. I didn't ask him to do this. I was actually just asking him to release his pole forward, but I believe that they will do what they need to in order to release their body. And that has always been hard for him to kind of turn his head to the left properly. So, of course, I'm going to encourage that and help him release it. And as you can see, he's still not having it. So, I decided to move on from the pole release and do a little TMJ um, release with his mouth and just to release like all of the mouth tension because the thing about the TMJ in the jaw is that if you have any tension going on through their TMJ, it's going to lock their whole body up. The TMJ is actually a really interesting joint because it needs to slide in order to allow the whole horse to relax. And if you think about it, like as a person, if you clench your jaw, are you able to relax any of your other body parts? Just try it out and see. And another cool thing about the TMJ is that it is very closely linked to the front feet. So it's actually a proprioceptive joint, which means that it allows the TMJ helps the horses to feel where they're at in space in their jaw. So clearly, if there's tension, they're not going to be able to function as well as they can. And it is directly linked to the front feet through myofascial connections. And as you can tell, like, of course, they're going to have pole pain and TMJ pain if they have sore feet, or vice versa, because of those connections through the body. There's a ton of extensive research that has been done on the connection of the jaw and the hind leg and how the head is turned. If you were to attend a dissection of some kind, they often show you the connection of the jaw and pole placement and where the head is at to the hawk even. So like basically if they're not able to move fluidly, move independently through their TMJ and have less pole tension, they're actually not able to step up under themselves as well. So that could also be the reason why that Oliver was shorter on his right hind because he has been carrying himself with so much tension. And as you can see, he really enjoyed the TMJ release. And I loved how he was able to kind of put his head down after, and his neck looked a lot smoother after he did so. So I was loving the progress I was seeing on him. He's such a love. He's so fun to work with. And I feel like he is very communicative about his needs and about what he wants from me. And I just appreciated that he didn't hold it against me after I rode him and he was so much more sore. Like, I feel like he is still really willing to go through this rehab and to work with me, which is so much fun. And I'm super grateful to him and also to Morgan and all of the other people that I've learned from that has allowed me to learn the tools and like just even see what's going on in my horse's body because it helps a lot when you're trying to work with them and make these decisions on how to do groundwork with them, how to ride them, how to handle them, what kind of hoof care to do because it's just so important and so special to be able to have that partnership with them and to show them that you're aware of what's going on in their body. So I then moved on to the shoulder release. And as you can see, he's actually wanting to walk through this. What was interesting was this was another area in his body, especially that I noticed was way too loose. So we had removed some of the tension, but now that revealed the weakness through his body because a tense muscle is always going to be a weak muscle. And there's not as much of like depth or like muscle belly to his shoulder muscles because he has been traveling with his head up, because he has been kind of upside down in his whole spine, which is the opposite of what we want in a riding horse because we want them to be able to live through their abdominals, engage their thoracic sling to be able to carry us in order to not damage their bodies any further. So that was a really interesting release. He tossed his head down and threw it down. He was much tighter on his right shoulder than on his left, but he threw his head down and then it opened up all of that space between his scapula and his neck there. And he decided that he needed to walk off in order to process the changes. So I decided to just allow him to do that. And then I'm going to go back and reassess before I move him out again. So What I noticed was we did release a lot of the tension in his head and neck where he's not wanting to throw it up any further, but he's still quite short on his right hind and his left front. So that diagonal is there is something tension wise going along that one. And I also feel like his left front is the most painful one out of all four right now. So that makes a difference in the stride lengths. But it was really interesting because as I work him through a rhythm, he goes back and forth. He will look really good at some points and then not at others. And like I added a little bit of pressure to get him to move a little bit faster just to see what happens. And what I've noticed when I ask him not only to speed up, but also to stop, his main response is actually to throw his head up. So that's something I'm going to be working on with his training to help him to not move that further. But as you can see, he's warmed up more and he's wanting to put his head down and stretch, which is amazing. All good things. And for the sake of the video, I did switch sides, but I do feel like it's really important to kind of let them have that feel good moment while you're working with them. If they're starting to move better, don't immediately just stop like I did. Like, I wish I had kept going because he was starting to look just like he was feeling a little bit better. And I also have noticed, and I think I pointed out in previous videos, it's harder for him to circle going to the left than it is to the right. And I believe that is due to tooth balance, TMJ balance, like over time. And I was noticing that he's actually having an easier time looking in to the left circle because he used to basically just throw his head out to the outside of the circle, and that is usually a sign that there's something going on in their body that is preventing them from doing so. So we ended our session here. I was so proud of him. He did amazing. The whole time was only about 20 minutes, and I didn't feel like it made him more sore during, which is always a good sign, especially after what happened last week. And I like to end the session just sitting with them and maybe asking for some gentle weight shifts back to help them engage those abdominals, engage those pecs and thoracic sling in order to lift their back up. Um, and just give them a second to kind of soak in what happened. I feel like the slower you go with this work, the better, because it does take a lot of effort, like, especially with all of his weak muscles and just how long he's had these tension patterns. It's so good for his brain just to relax and absorb those changes. And I thought it was so cute. I was going to let him roll after the session, but I took his halter off and he just followed me. So I felt like that was a really good sign that what we had done was helpful and that he enjoyed it. So, anyway, thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.